Okay, well, welcome to Alpine Learning Group's Innovations in Autism webinar series. For those of you who don't know, Alpine Learning Group offers a full range of diagnostic and applied behavior analysis-based educational and clinical services to individuals with autism across the ages. Each year during Autism Acceptance Month, we share our expertise through free webinars and make them available to the community. At the close of the presentation, we'll share a link to learn about other presentations in this series and information about our programs. If you don't know, I'm Dr. Bridget Taylor. I'm the co-founder and current CEO of Alpine Learning Group, and I've had the privilege of being part of the learners at Alpine for 35 years for the learners and their families and for the professionals who work here. Today, I'm really excited for today's panel. I'm joined by Katrina Roberts, the Director of Adult and Transition Services, and two parents of children with autism who will be sharing their experiences, Lucille and Suzette. We are expecting one more panelist. I'm hoping that he'll arrive, and when he does, as I said, we'll have him join the panel. So the way we'll structure this panel, it's a little bit different than attending a webinar where it's content driven with slides. I'm going to actually stop sharing my slides right now so that we can all be on the screen together with the panelists. And the way that we'll structure this panel is that I have some questions that I've prepared, and Katrina has some questions as well that she'll be asking. And this is an opportunity for us to ask two parents of individuals with autism at different ages, at different points in their development, their experience of what it's like for them to raise a child with autism. And so I've prepared some questions. You may have some questions that you have yourself. And at the end, we'll have some time for you to ask questions. You can chat them and put them in the question answer, and we'll be able to read those questions later on. So I thought we would start at the beginning. And as you answer each question, Lucille and Suzette, please tell us a little bit about your child with autism and their current age. If you answer the first question, provide that information for context. So the first question that I have, which I think is probably a real salient part of your journey, was what it was like when your child was first diagnosed with autism, what that experience was like for you as a parent, what it was like for the family. And so I'll start with you, Suzette. Tell us a little bit about your daughter and a little bit about what that experience was like for you.
Sure, thank you. And thank you for having me today. Melanie is 24 years old. She was diagnosed when she was just 2 years old. And at the time, we were living overseas. We were not living in the States. So it took us a little while to get the diagnosis, and we didn't get it until we came back to the United States. It's a shock. It's a shock. And you just want to like pretend like it didn't happen, and you just want it to all go away. So it is definitely a shock to the system, but I think what my advice would be looking back on it is I gave myself a day. I gave myself a day to deal with the anger, cry, do whatever it was that I needed to do for myself. And then day two, it was, we don't have any more time for this. We have to get to work. And my husband and I at the time luckily we were on the same page. We were like, this is real, this is happening, this is not a secret. We were very firm in our belief that our family, our friends needed to know this because we were going to need a larger network to support us in this, both in many different ways. And we still have that network, and that network continues to build. So my advice would be, don't waste time, give yourself one day, and then move on and get to work and enlist the support of the professionals, the educators. Read, do your research, and just know that there's a lot of positive positive things to happen. And I can tell you now, she was 2 years old when she was diagnosed, and today she is just a joy. She is just a joy, and we are so proud of everything that she has done.
Were you, just as a just follow-up question, did you sense something was going on with her development? What was it that made you concerned at the time?
So when she was 13 months, I had visited our pediatrician in England, and I said, when I call her in the park, when I call her name, she doesn't turn around and she doesn't come back to me. I always have to go and get Melanie. And his response was, perhaps she doesn't like the name you've chosen for her. I can't make that up, but yes, that was his response. But I knew that something was off, but I remember specifically being at a lunch with friends who had a son that was just 11 weeks younger than Melanie. And I called him and I said, Spencer, can you come here? And he came over to me, and I gave him a piece of tinfoil from Melanie's lunch that she had eaten. I said, can you please go put this in the garbage for me?
Mm.
And he went and he put that in the garbage for me. And I turned to my husband at the time and I said, we've got a big problem.
Okay.
We have a problem.
And did you have an experience where you said the one doctor was like, maybe she doesn't like her name. Did you have doctors who didn't believe you initially?
No, that was the only, shocking experience that we had. After that, we didn't have any other experiences like that.
Yeah. Lucille, was your experience similar?
Interesting. Yes, and thank you for having me, Bridget, and welcome. I'm glad to be on the panel. My experience was similar.
First, how old is Mike now?
Oh, Michael is going to be 40 years old in July. And again, as Suzette was saying, and he's a joy. Mike was, I ran into some of the similar problems. When I noticed something was wrong, my best friend had a son about the same age as Mike, and same thing, he wasn't listening, he wasn't responding appropriately to commands, and wasn't doing the same things that my friend's son was doing. So I knew there was something wrong. When I approached my pediatrician, he said, "Oh, one part of his brain is developing faster than the other," which I was a nurse. I knew that was nonsense. Um, I kind of basically demanded a neurological workup. And we did go for a follow-up neurologically on a child study team at the time. Um, and they said they were kind of like pointing to autism, but never mentioning the word.
Mm.
Speech delays, developmentally delayed, things like that, which, got me kind of crazy because I wanted something solid to go on. Because when I would call Mike, he wouldn't respond either. But if he heard Sesame Street from 2 doors down, he would come running. And so we were like, it's not his hearing. And even though we did have a complete hearing examination done. So we finally wound up at a neurologist's office, and he told me to put Mike away, that it was going to be some of the worst times of my life keeping him um, with us at home, which infuriated me. And as Suzette was saying, I took about a day or two to cry once I heard the word autism or autistic tendencies back then. Remember, this was 40 years ago when there was not a lot of talk about autism at all. And really, the only video I remember seeing of somebody with autism was someone banging their head against the wall, because that's what I saw in nursing school. So I was devastated to even hear the word. But as Suzette did, I hit the ground running. I read everything. I researched everything. Lovas, the Me book, back then that was like our Bible back then. The Me book, it was crazy. Trying to develop, and nothing came easy back then. It was different programs. Mike was diagnosed at 19 months. And it was just challenging to find, appropriate interventions for him at the time. So we were doing different kinds of programs based through the district. We lived on Long Island, so we had, whatever resources they had is what we were offered. and they weren't appropriate at all for Mike. You know, once I started learning about the LOVAS and applied behavior analysis and things like that, I knew that we had to, you know, start to put in place something that he was going to benefit from, because his autism was significant. He was nonverbal for a very, very long time. His eye contact was severely impaired. He certainly was regressing as the days went by. So it was the devastation, but like, you know, I didn't stop. My friends were like, "You don't come around anymore. You don't see us." I said, "Because I have something much more important I have to deal with."
Yeah. Lucille, can I ask you just to put your camera up a little? There you go. Thank
Okay.
you. We were losing your face.
Okay.
You know, it's interesting to hear both of your experiences with your diagnosis of your child at different points in time, right? In the history of autism intervention and diagnoses. So in the almost 40 years, almost, I guess around 38 years ago, they said, place your child in an institution, right?
Right.
And I would imagine, Suzette, you didn't hear that. I don't know if you heard something similar in terms of just, you know, outlook or what you should be doing. But it's just interesting, those 2 points in time had your experiences, while similar, there might have been different interactions with professionals. Was there anything that you could think of in the early days, right after diagnosis, that was really helpful for you, like either a connection with a professional, something that helped you in terms of either what you were struggling with or what you were able to have your child experience?
Well, I think what I would say is that, you know, at the time that Melanie was diagnosed, which was in 2002, autism was very trendy. It was it was sort of just like kind of making the rise of it, like it was more common than it really had been in the years past. And there were a lot of people entering the field, and not always with the best of intentions. And I think that there were a lot of distractions along the way, in terms of alternative medicine, alternative treatments, you know, people thinking that they were going to be very helpful. I had one service provider, an agency, that when I went to them and I said, well, what can I do to learn, you know, do more? What can I do to better myself so that I can help my daughter? And she told me to go out and purchase the DSM, like that, you know, huge textbook, and to read that. It was like, I opened it up. I was like, here I am. I'm a finance person. I couldn't get through like the first chapter. I'm like, this is not helpful at all.
Yeah.
So I would say that there were a lot of distractions along the way. And maybe there still are today. I hope there are fewer of them out there, because your time, and I can't stress this enough, is so important. And you can easily fall down a rabbit hole of going in not such a great direction. So I would just, I think that was a little bit of a challenge for us in the beginning.
Yeah. So it's in some ways, Lucille, your experience was like there was so few resources, and there was one that became very targeted, which was applied behavior analysis back in the 90s, right? And then, Suzette, by the time your child was diagnosed, there was all these other things that you had to sort through and tease out. Well, what's the most, you know, where's the science? Where's the research?
Yeah.
So it became, may have been a little harder to discriminate. I think things are probably still along the lines of families have to sort through things, but ABA is much more ubiquitous than it had been, you know, even the 20 years ago when your child was diagnosed. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about, because you have other children, and what was the experience like, either describing the diagnosis to your other children, or how they came to know that your child had autism. How did the siblings come to know this?
For my kids, I had Mike was the second. I was pregnant with my third, and then I had a fourth. But It was hard for my oldest daughter because, you know, from being an only child that she was for 8 years, Michael is 8 years younger than her. It was hard because she was the center of attention. And then along comes her brother, who requires an enormous, enormous amount of, you know, attention and programming and you know, and digging through, like you said, the resources back then were so limited and so far-fetched, you know, the refrigerator parents and all this kind of old autism information. So I spent a lot of time away from my, and then when my, you know, my third came along, you know, it was just juggling my attention with them to equally share myself. And it was so hard, and I'm, you know, proud of my kids now. They really, you know, and what we used to explain to them was something very simple. Your brother has a boo boo in the brain. Like I didn't even know how else to explain it to them.
Mm.
But you know, we were going to love him no matter what, and you know, you have to protect your brother against anybody that might want to hurt him or take advantage of him. Or, and it was hard for them to understand, but it was very clear to them as they got older that their brother was not typical like them, and we had to make all these adjustments in our life when it came to eating, vacations, going out. Everything had to be an adjustment, um, and we our goal was to still be or a family and still do everything together no matter how much work it took or how much time I there was. Most of the time, I'd say most of the time, 90% of the time, we did everything together because I was never going to have Mike be separate from his family and not be able to be included in our family, you know, togetherness kind of a thing. So it was hard on them, but they were really, really, um, and resources too. I mean, we had resources for our kids they put in the programs that in the program that we were in at the time. As the kids got older, and there was a lot of education through them. So it took a lot.
Yeah. So it sounds like having an explanation for them that their sibling was different, but in a developmentally appropriate way. So when they were younger, it's like a boo-boo in the brain, right?
Yeah,
And then as they got older,
right.
the truth and the reality and the way that they can understand it based on their own maturity. But it sounds like that goal of maintaining the sibling relationships and the family dynamics and family activities were really important and essential. Was
Yeah.
your experience similar, Suzette?
Well, interestingly enough, very similar in the sense that we made both Eli and Sydney's, Melanie's siblings, we made them ambassadors. So I sort of elevated them with this idea of, you're an expert, like, you know this stuff. So when they were little and they would have a friend come over to the house, and of course, you know, you have that concern, okay, is Melanie going to start scripting while they're sitting at the table and having snack? And how is he going, you know, the friend is going to look at, you know, Melanie and be like, oh, this is weird and whatnot. So I would equip them with language and explanations that would help them to get ahead of it. So I would help them to, you know, before, you know, anything even happened, to introduce your friend to Melanie and say, this is my sister Melanie. She's really nice. She has autism. You don't know what that is, right? So it just means that her brain works a little differently than ours does. And so they were able to sort of get ahead of it so that when it did happen, it wasn't such a shock. And it sort of made them feel like a little bit cool because they were like an expert. And then, as you know, because we were very sort of vocal or outward about Melanie's diagnosis, and we in our community, and we did sorry, different events and to raise money and awareness for autism. And I did fun things like, you know, running a 5K in a tutu, when it was like tutus for Tenafly and autism. And then all of a sudden, all the girls wanted to be a part of it. And Sydney was all of a sudden like so cool. She's like the tutu girl, and everyone's raising money for autism. And so it sort of took on this life of its own. And then Melanie had all of these ambassadors because they all wanted to be a part of it, and they all wanted to, you know, be that kid that helped or that was an expert. And then you sort of heard some kids explaining it to other kids with the language that I had given to my kids.
Right,
And
right.
so it just had this really cool knock-on effect that was really very rewarding.
So it sounds like allowing them to participate and experience activities related to autism events helps them to participate in the experience. And Lucille, you also mentioned that school programs that Mike was involved in had some of these, you know, sibling groups and things like that that were helpful.
I will,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I will just say this because I know I painted like a very rosy picture of it in emboldening them, and that is all true. But it's not to say that there weren't times where like my kids were like, but that's not fair, and that's not, you know, and this and that. And my husband always had said to my kids, it will always be fair, but it will never be equal. And that just kind of resonated with them. Like, Melanie needs more now, but you're going to need more at another time. And it's never going to be equal at any time, but it'll always be fair because
Yeah.
everyone's going to get what they need.
I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah,
Mm.
because, you know, the fair is the important part, not necessarily the equal part.
Exactly.
So
I'm
you're
amazed by your strength as parents, you know, to really just, you know, step in, and as moms, we're always advocating for our children, but just the creative ways that you're both like coming at it to really enlist your children and, you know, and your families for support. And while you're grasping the idea of this new diagnosis as well for yourselves, you know, you've got a lot going on to process that for yourself. I'm wondering if you had the same experiences with your extended family members, like telling them and sharing the diagnosis. Did you also feel that same level of support with them, or what was that experience like for you?
Well, sorry, you go
No,
ahead.
No, my family, and I still think they have a hard time grasping autism because they haven't lived it. They certainly love Michael more than anything. You know, my brothers, my sisters, my mother, you know, all extended family members love Mike to death. They absolutely, but they still don't grasp, you know, the reality of his autism because they haven't lived it on a daily basis. So sometimes I get, you know, a sympathetic, which I don't want. I don't want, you know, them to feel for Mike, kind of a thing. I want them to look at him as a strong man who had to learn a lot to live in our world. But on a day-to-day basis, they don't see what I see. So it's hard for them to kind of grasp his autism. The only one is my daughter Jessica, who clearly understands autism the best out of anyone in my family. So I mean, she could see things in a second flat before anybody else would ever even notice it in my family. And for that, I'm so thankful. But yeah, they're better. They get better as time goes on. But Mike's going to be 40, and they still don't get it 100% yet. But you know, but we keep, you know, explaining and explaining and explaining and explaining. You
Yeah.
know, this is the way his brain processes things. It's very different than ours. You know.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm sorry, Suzette. Why don't you speak?
Yeah, no, I was, you know, my family, I would say, is from the very beginning was completely on board and very understanding and very always, of course, wanting to help and do whatever they could to help us. There was one thing at the very beginning when Melanie was first diagnosed that absolutely drove me crazy, and was when family members would say, "Don't worry, everything's going to be okay. She's going to be fine. She's going to be fine." And here you are, and you are facing this enormous unknown, and you know that right now, nothing is fine. There is nothing fine about this. And it was just like, please stop saying that. Please don't tell me that everything is going to be fine. And then I had one very distant relative who, instead of telling me that everything was going to be fine, instead what she said to me, she said, you know, I can't imagine how hard this is for you right now. You guys must be really struggling. I want you to know I'm really proud of everything that you're doing for your daughter. It was like, oh my God, thank you. Somebody told me that it's not fine. And right now it's not. And maybe one day it will be, but we don't know that yet. So until
Right.
then, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah. So your children get diagnosed and then they become school aged and you have to start looking for a school. What what did you look for in a school? And if you had to give advice to families whose children may be preschool, who are listening, who aren't yet enrolled in school, what was that experience like? What were you looking for? And what kinds of advice do you have for families? What should they look for in a school program? Lucille?
School programming. My experience, with school programmings was extremely challenging back then. Mike was in 3 different placements before the age of 3. It was, and because I had exposure to the LOVAS, that me book and the applied behavior, the concept of applied behavior analysis and everything, I knew that there was only one way to get through to him. And these programs were just housing him. They were just housing him. They were letting him, a lot of self-stimulatory behaviors. And what was important that I could go view Mike and see what he was doing all day long, to be able to go to the program and see. What was important was that he wasn't just doing absolutely nothing all day, and that the people understood autism, which they didn't back then. There was very few professionals who really understood what to do with children with autism. They had no idea. And that was probably one of the most frustrating things that I've ever went through. I mean, school after school after school. I mean, here I am, first home programming my son with the district. It was, and they're trying to teach him some basic stuff at home. Then I put him in another school and they have absolutely no idea what to do with him. They wanted to put him in just a mixture of every kind of disability, and everybody's needs were totally different. But they were treating them like they were all the same, and that their needs weren't any different, and they were significantly different. Multiple different diagnoses of Down syndrome, CP, you name it. They were in ECA. Move them to another program, and it's the same issues. People just saying, oh, don't, but this is, oh, he played with sand today. Well, I was up there viewing, and he was playing sand for 2 hours. So it's all these. It made me absolutely crazy. I couldn't find anywhere where I lived where there was a program that the staff knew what they were doing. They were trained. They understood autism. The activities were age appropriate. Nothing. Those were the kinds of things I was looking for, and people who really cared, and the communication with me and what did he do all day long? Can we work together on figuring out how to get him to communicate? There was really none of that until I moved to New Jersey. So those were the kinds of things that I looked for, and it was just not there. I was extremely frustrated.
So it sounds like you were really focused, you saw some exemplars of things that you didn't want. They didn't keep him engaged, they didn't know how to work with him. And then you were really looking for that shared, just that partnership and that collaboration and experts who knew what they were doing. I just want to welcome Mark. Thank you for joining us. I'm glad you're here. We just we're going through some questions, and the question that's been proposed is, after diagnosis, you're looking for a school program. What were some of the important ingredients that you were looking for in a school program, and what advice might you have for people who are listening who are looking for school programs? Like, what are some of the ingredients that you think have been helpful in a school program for your child? And you could just say how old your child is and who he is, if you don't mind.
Sure, thank you, and apologies for I had the time wrong. Our son Kai, now 21, and so we have been through that that process, boy, but it's been so many years now. The initial ingredients, much like you mentioned, Lucille, were knowledgeability. We wanted support from a program that knew more than we did, which at first, of course, we were completely baffled by not only autism, but the process and the structures in place around taking care of individuals with disabilities. Of course, that knowledgeability was not readily available to us here in our local district. We had some very caring individuals in our school district, but we didn't at the time, like you say, 20 years ago now, we didn't at the time have the understanding of of autism in the same way we do now, and the practices around ABA, for example. So we found that was really a problem for us in our local school district. So we had to look further afield to find a program that could not only help our son Kai, but also help mom and dad with outreach on things like how as a parent, how do you get through to your son? How do you help them learn? How do you help them recognize when they're doing something well and as we hope, or how can we help steer them away from certain things that they shouldn't do? That support to us as parents was also crucial.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So having that, parent training, parent engagement, learning as part of the process. Anything, Suzette, that you would add?
I think just we were learning as we were going. So Melanie was in a home program, and I'll give one example. She had a speech therapist, a prompt therapist, like all the certifications you could possibly imagine. And like the closest approximation she could get for the word noodles was "uz." That was the closest we could get. And then all of a sudden we started with ABA. And within 3 weeks, Melanie was saying, I want noodles. Okay, well, that worked. I need that. How do I get more of that? So that was when we realized, like, okay, we need ABA. It's effective for her. And that's how we started our search for programming.
Yeah. So your children with autism are, one is an adult male, one is emerging adult male, and the other is a adult female. And I guess I'm curious, was there a part in their development and in your journey as parents where you realized that they would need help to one extent or another, some type of help the rest of their life? Like, was there a turning point where you were like, okay, we're in it for the long haul, and you either changed strategies or you started to think about things differently? Because I think that's a process for many families. And I wondered if you could share if there was some type of turning point for you where you realized that. Was it someone telling you that, a professional? Was it your own personal experience? Was it you as just a parent coming to terms with that? Like, what was there a shift, or was that feeling always there? Anybody want to take that one?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think that understanding came early on, and it was simply out of understanding or recognizing that Melanie can be easily identified as a special person, and knowing that she's going to need to be protected and cared for in that way. And I would never leave that for chance. So I know that she's always going to need support, for the rest of her life. And I think that understanding or acknowledgement came a lot earlier on than you might expect.
Yeah. Mark?
So I think for us, it came probably in 2 stages. The first recognition that he was special and going to need some sort of help, we somehow managed to block out of our awareness for a little while. And it wasn't until a teacher in one of his extracurricular programs pulled us aside one day and said, you might need to have some additional conversations around. You might need to see what's going on with Kai here. And then once we got into it and understood, oh, okay, we've got a son with autism, holy cow. It took us, I think our first hope was, oh, okay, let's do something about this. He's going to be one of those that we get some help for a little while, and then he's just going to be super fine for the rest of his life at some point along the way. But it took years, I think, for us to acknowledge, boy, this is not a situation we're going to be able to remedy exactly. We're going to have to learn to put the supports in place for him, not even just for our lifetimes, but for the remainder of his. The notion of getting him those supports that would be in place for decades. That acknowledgement it took quite a long time before we got there, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And I appreciate that response. I think for some families, it's that process of kind of learning over time and, the experience of raising your son and seeing, just kind of experiencing the parenting of your son and then coming to realization over time and interaction. Lucille, did you have a similar experience?
Yeah, I think as parents, when you find out your child has special needs and especially autism, because it's one of the most shocking diagnoses, because there's such a spectrum of it. There's such a, um, there's so many different levels of autism. And you're always hoping and praying that your child is the one that is going to get better. I've seen some incredible miracles in Mike's current program, where you say, you know what, we're going to get him this intervention, we're going to get him this education, this is what he needs. He does well in ABA. We started our own home program. He's taken off. We're going to get him better, and then we're going to mainstream him into a classroom, and he's going to be okay. And then you come, a couple of years down the road, and you see that those deficits are so significant that it's not going to be just a couple of years. It's going to be, oh, maybe 10 more years, or, but you come to a realization. When they start to fall so significant behind their typical peers, that this is forever, it's a lifetime. And I knew it was a lifetime issue from when he was diagnosed. I knew it wasn't going to go away. But I didn't know how how impaired he was until he started to hit 7 years old and 8 years old and 9 years old, and he still wasn't speaking. And, he could barely speak words that I mean, he had come a long way. And, it's so funny because they come such long ways. They do the most incredible things, but it's for their, as compared for their disability, though, not as compared to the gap with the typical child and them are just, so it's so big.
Yeah.
But he's grown into his own person. And that's what the most exciting for us is that even though he's going to need a lifetime of care, which we've already implemented that. He has his own apartment. He lives with a caregiver. He loves it. And so we've chosen our pathway for him. But he's come such a way for his successes are just as amazing as the successes as my typical kids. I'm just so proud of him, and he's has his own personality now, and from a child who didn't have a personality, when he was early on in his autism, he was just so engaged in autistic behaviors, and now he's Mike. He's this great guy.
Yeah, that's great.
And I'd say life is a roller coaster. We're in for a wild ride, right?
Yeah, well, that's okay. That's okay.
And that's, I mean, that's for any of us becoming parents, right? You never know what's going to happen. But there's definitely all those developmental stages that they're going through and we're watching as parents. And so we have our highs and we have our lows, and some are easier and some are more difficult. And a lot of the literature says that families will experience high emotional responses at key stages of development across their life. And, you have we've already talked about diagnosis. We've talked about finding a school program. Now they're in school. You're thinking about transition age, transition to adulthood. I think you've been through most of them. And Mark, sounds like you're about to go into that transition to adulthood now. But were there times in your children's lives that were more difficult than others? And what that what that experience was like for you and getting through that. Lots of thinking faces.
I think that, I'll speak real quick first, but I mean, all of this that we've talked about, and I do have to just say one thing that, your heart is broken from day one. It's broken. And as they get older, like I'm so proud of the accomplishments, but I know I look at Mike sometimes, and as I watch my kids go to college, like he's not going to go to college. Watch my kids get married. He's not going to get married. He's not going to drive a car. He's not going to do, and that's okay. I'm okay with it. Those are the times where you're just like, oh, it's like, because I look at him and sometimes I think, what his life would have been like if he was typical. And I don't harp on that or go, crazy on that or back on that. But yeah, there are times where you're hurting and you're seeing, the things that he's not going to do, but the things he does do make up for it.
Mhm.
I was going to ask, when you're feeling that way, is there something that's been helpful for you? Like either seeing, experiencing that feeling, but also like getting in touch with like, well, what is it that he is doing? Has there been something that's been helpful in that context?
Oh yeah, I like I said, I always look at how successful he's been, and his life right now is so full. Like, and those are the things that bring that joy back. Like I look at he's got a busier life than I do. I mean, he's busy constantly. He's doing everything that he loves to do. So, like I said, it'll make up for all the heartache in between. So those are the things. Yes, when I see him interaction with his siblings, or when he's with his peers, or when he puts a big smile on his face when I know he's like something happening that he loves. Those are the things that just are like, we made it, man. We made it through autism. We're here. We're at the finish line. And now it's just keep on growing and keep on living, and that's where we are now. At his age, that's where we are now.
Do either of you have similar experiences where those things sometimes feel a little more tender than others, those experiences?
I would echo what Lucille says. There are definitely those moments that sting. The graduations, the proms, the license, all of those, they sting. But when you take like you said, a broader view, and you look at your child and you realize that those are the things that sting. They sting you. They don't sting your child, right? It's you. It's not them. Because when you look at them, the things that, at least for my daughter, that make her happy are the things that nobody can take away. It's the first snowfall right before winter and she's all excited. It's just like a beautiful, bright, sunny day. It's those things. It's the hugs. It's the simple things that make her happy. Those things sting us. They don't necessarily, at least in my case, I won't speak for others, but in my case, they don't sting her because she doesn't know and she's not aware, and she doesn't care. She doesn't care about driving or
Yeah.
Mark?
What a blessing on that. On that similar note, when we're walking around town or something like that, and I catch people staring at our son, like, because obviously there's a little bit of stigma that gets trotted out and on display when we're out and about. And most people are super good about it, but occasionally that is something that stings me, like you say, Suzette, but our son is oblivious. He doesn't care about that. It must be kind of a blessing in some ways to not have the self-consciousness that some of us do.
Yeah.
And historically, I'd say the period that we found probably most challenging was around puberty, all the issues that come up there, and at the same time, we're still figuring out what are Kai's capabilities. We have to keep a very open mind, and worked with our school closely to keep trying new things, experimenting with different approaches to learning and different kinds of content he could learn. And at the same time, we're living with tremendous uncertainty. What is he going to become? What is he capable of? We don't want to limit him with any preconceived notions, but by keeping our minds open, we also introduce a certain amount of suffering in the process through that uncertainty. I remember that period as being very challenging, both because of all the sexual issues, but also the general stew of uncertainty that we faced
Yeah.
about what we could expect.
Yeah, adolescence is that kind of pivotal, critical time for learners with autism. So we're coming down to the last 10 minutes, and I do want to take some questions from some of the attendees, but I wanted to just ask these just two questions at the end, as we're coming to an end is, what does quality of life mean for you and your child with autism? If you could just share with us.
Well, I would say for us, quality of life is having purpose, not just existing, but thriving and improving and having a reason to get up every morning, having a reason to brush your teeth and head out the door, and something to do that is going to be productive, meaningful, and enjoyable all at the same time. And I think that is real quality of life. And then, of course, on the other side is developing relationships and connections with your friends, your family, and meeting and developing new relationships.
Lucille?
I think quality of life, because we've been through so many stages with Mike, quality of life is always, for him, his life should be filled with dignity and respect. He should be living in a place where he can be as most independent as possible and do the things that he enjoys the most, because Mike has worked, and all of our adults, young adults, have worked so hard at becoming part of our world and to utilize the skills that they've learned. A quality of life where he's not dependent on, I want someone that, because, obviously, I don't know if all of our adults will be living with in some kind of a assisted housing or an apartment or a group home or whatever, but that they are surrounded by people who care about them, who love them, who treat them with dignity and respect, just like they would anyone else. And that's extremely important for me and for Mike. I mean, that he lives the way that what we want to live and the way we want to be treated. He should be treated exactly the same way. And I will not stop until that part of his life is completely taken care of. Where I know that he enjoys going home. Like, he enjoys being with his family, surrounded by family and friends. He loves to be with his family, and he also loves to go home to his apartment. Like, he's happy.
Thank you.
Those comforts of home.
Mark?
Couldn't have said it better. And what good examples. Yeah, very similar for Kai, of course. He'll have all the needs a normal person has, from security, a need for safety, and ultimately something that lets him build his own sense of self-esteem, sense of belonging to a community of some sort, the relationships that you mentioned, Susan. And ultimately, if he feels those things and seems to be enjoying his days, having, good relationships and having some fun with the folks he's around, I think he'll be okay with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Quality of life is the same thing that we all want, right? Whether you're typical or not typical, experiencing life, we all want to be accepted and feel a member of our communities, right? And so now as we're starting off Autism Acceptance Month, I was just wondering if you could share what Autism Acceptance Month means for you and your family.
I don't know, I'll quickly say, you know, the more awareness that we provide, the better off we are. There are still some people who don't know a lot about autism. Um, but I think that autism awareness every year and every month and for a long time now has been a pathway for people to learn about autism and to try and understand about autism. And I think it's you know, for me, it's Mike's diagnosis to be out there, and it's not even, you know, that they're just understand what he has to live with, what he has to deal with, and they have a better understanding of, you know, if I had a mind that thought like that, that would be challenging for me. I think that awareness and understanding of what they have to go through is really important for me to have people understand. Because you know they sometimes they say the word, there's a blank in their mind, they don't know that they have a struggle with processing, or you know, whether it's anything neurological or anything, they have no idea, you know, what our guys have to go through to kind of like fit in every day with us. And you know, we want them to be socially accepted and socially appropriate and this and that, and sometimes they can't fill that full bill there, you know, I mean, they have autism, so they have to be a little bit respectful of what's going on with them. And I think autism awareness is hopefully brings more and more information out there, for
Yeah.
our loved ones.
Either of you want to add?
I think what it's done is by creating this awareness, it's really and I think a lot of things have also contributed to this, where it's become more accepted. So it's, oh, okay, I understand you have autism. Like even like with the younger children who now know autism, like a kid wouldn't dare bully a kid with autism in schools these days. At least I can't imagine that would happen. I mean, it's like, because it's become so more accepted and understood today than it was in the years past. I feel like it's taken that out of it, and it's created an understanding and a level of awareness where people that are not part of this community are almost more respectful of people that are in the community.
Yeah.
We might hope that that leads to some additional curiosity about the situation, to understand it even more deeply. And I'd look for ideally, some additional compassion from our society, our community, to, like you say, sort of be respectful of the folks that are working through this.
Yes. So I just want to give an opportunity for a question here. A parent asks, do you have any regrets about decisions that you made, or those that you consider to have been your best decision that you made? We could start with you, Mark, if you have any thoughts about that.
Regrets.
Maybe it's easier to talk about best.
With respect to Kai, the regrets are actually very few, but I'd have to acknowledge my wife's, it could have been regretful if we didn't do what my wife got on. She was super aggressive about reaching out to get help, reach out to experts in your community, talk to your doctors, pediatricians, find out who's the best at working with this that they can recommend, and then don't be bashful about reaching out for help. If we hadn't, I don't know where we'd be. If my wife had left that to me, I would have just probably caused more suffering. But that was a great thing that she did for us. So
making decisions and, you know, really moving on certain decisions and not kind of just staying status. Yeah. Suzette?
I think, to be perfectly honest, you're going to make mistakes along the way. It's bound to happen. Just own it and move on. Just don't spend too much time, dwelling on the mistakes, just move on and move forward in a positive direction. And I think in terms of what I would say as on the positive side of that is try and really discover what your child loves and enjoys and figure out a way to capitalize on that. Find their strengths and use it to their advantage, because there's something special about every single one of these kids.
Lucille, any regrets or best decisions?
Well, one of my best decisions was coming here to New Jersey. It was one of the best decisions that we've ever made as a family, to his current placement. One regret, was I do regret putting him in a group home for a few years. Big regret, but I don't think I would have been able at the time. There was not a lot of options that we have now. We were one of the first parents to get our kids in, supported housing. Even though it was a very, very strenuous couple of years, and it was sucked the life out of me, to be perfectly honest with you. I was there more than I was at home, like monitoring everything, and it was horrible. And I couldn't get him out for a while because of all the changes New Jersey was going through. But that was my biggest regret. But I don't think with that being said, I don't think I would have learned clearly and exactly what I wanted for Mike.
Yeah.
I mean, that really, really, I wouldn't settle for anything less. I kept him home with me until I found what I wanted.
Yeah.
And I went and got it.
Thank you. Well, we are just at the hour mark, and I think that's a good place to wrap up. Thank you so much for sharing your personal experience with us today. Thank you to the attendees who are here listening. I just want to share a last slide here, a little bit about Alpine if you're interested. Just so that you may not know, if you're here for the first time and don't know about Alpine, we do have various services if you are interested in those services. We provide consultation, diagnostics, school programs, social skills. So with that, I will just close and thank everybody for the information. I learned a lot today, and it was great to hear your personal stories and your personal journeys. And thank you, Katrina Roberts, for joining us for this session. Thank you, everybody.